Welcome to another episode of Looking Back at historical Fort Ord, California.
CDEC has two centers in California. An administrative and scientific headquarters at Fort Ord near Monterey, and a huge 250,000-acre field laboratory called the Hunter Liggett Military Reservation about 90 miles to the south. Twice each year, in the spring and the fall, a 3-month series of controlled experiments takes place at Hunter Liggett, involving thousands of men and close to 1,000 major items of military equipment. In most of these experiments, new concepts are tested by friendly troops against an aggressor force, employing all the tricks that our military intelligence believes a potential enemy may be using 5 or 10 years in the future. A recent 3-month series was built around the concepts for several possible military organizations for tomorrow's Army. These organizations are all designed to operate on the battlefields of the future, where we must have a more mobile Army capable of rapid dispersal, and where we will present only very transitory, very elusive nuclear targets. In order to make certain that experiments are conducted and evaluated in a strictly scientific manner, CDEC has more than 30 outstanding scientists under permanent contract with the Stanford Research Institute of Menlo Park, California. The effective cooperation between military personnel and these experts from all branches of the sciences is one of the most gratifying features of CDEC. At Fort Ord, these records are broken down and compiled into special reports and statistics, and further reduced to IBM punched cards. It takes about 600,000 of these cards and perhaps 1 million photographs to register a 3-month series of experiments. At periodic intervals, these cards are sent to the Stanford Research Institute for further analysis on the automatic data processing computers. When the UNIVAC tape and the photographs and the punched cards come back once again to Fort Ord, each project team spends a final few months studying them, evaluating the concept, and organizing their reactions, their conclusions, and their recommendations into a final report, which is sent back to Fort Monroe, Virginia. On the basis of these reports, CONARC will be able to decide, years before they are needed, whether or not a projected military organization is a valid concept.
Well, by now we'd finished a month of training, mostly in the use of individual weapons and in basic field skills like land navigation and field first aid. But we weren't real infantrymen yet. We learned that for sure at the beginning of the 5th week. That was when the whole company began receiving instruction in what they call TFT, the technique of fire and tactics. From then on, for the next 4 weeks, the emphasis was on the practical application of the weapons and skills we'd been learning. In the technique of fire course, for example, we got a good many hours of classroom instruction in how to use firepower under different tactical situations. And nearby was the range, where we put theory into practice by firing at different groups of targets at varying ranges, grouped and shaped to represent an attacking enemy force on natural terrain. Besides the formal instruction from the various training committees, we got a lot of personal, informal help from our own company cadre. Our platoon corporal put in a lot of time with us on his own, reviewing lessons we'd learned, quizzing us with off-the-cuff questions about the different weapons, and helping us to bone up for exams. One of these exams came at the end of our 2nd week, a proficiency test in every subject we had studied so far. By this time, we'd really gotten into the swing of things as a military unit. Each outfit develops a pride of its own and tries to be the sharpest unit in the brigade. Ask any company, they'll say they're the best. I know we were. But when it came to the proficiency test, each man had to qualify in each subject on his own. We were tested in small groups as we moved from one test station to another. Things like land navigation, one of the things we studied during the first week of training. Each man had the same problem, but we weren't competing against each other. We were competing against a stopwatch. At another station, the subject was landmine warfare. We'd had 8 hours of instruction in this, and most of us made a passing grade. With a real mine, you'd better make a passing grade, so nobody took this lightly, even with dummy mines. Maybe it's only practice, but you try to avoid the slightest mistake. No use forming bad habits. Another test nobody goofs off on is first aid. The skill you drill into your fingers working on a canvas dummy could turn out to be a lifesaver for a good friend someday. This, too, we'd had in basic, but we were glad to get a refresher. And it was good to know that the guy alongside you is as qualified to help you as you are. Rifle to get the range to the target before he fires the big one. In short, they learn to work with the gun and with each other, which is just as important. After several hours of that first phase of TFT, we went on to the next phase, tactics. Part of that phase involved making an attack on a hill defended by aggressor troops. And in getting to the assault objective, we would gain some practical experience with the armored personnel carrier as a means of secure and rapid mobility across country. One thing about the exercise was fake. We used blank ammunition. Even so, if an observer figured you were hit by enemy fire, he declared you a casualty. That is, if he could see you at all in all that smoke. My own MOS is rifleman, just a plain old ground pounder with an M14. MOSs are assigned on the basis of what the Army needs most at the moment, as well as on a man's own ability and interest. In our company, I guess about 75% have the rifleman MOS. During the third and fourth weeks, we riflemen got nearly 70 hours of special training, a lot in the classroom and the bleachers, and a lot more on the firing range. We spent a lot of time on the machine gun range with the M60. Some days, 2 or 3 companies would be using this range at the same time, which may indicate how important machine gun training is to the infantry. Still, the range was never too busy for individual instruction. That's the whole point of the program here, advanced training, individual training. Another busy range was the AR, automatic rifle. This is the weapon I especially like. It's not too heavy, it's accurate, and it can really put out some trouble when the need arises. And of course, by this time, the rifle has become almost a part of you. They say, take care of it, and it'll take care of you. If it sounds corny, all right, but it also happens to be true. The guys who say it are the guys who ought to know. There's one more weapon I want to tell you about, Dad. The 50 caliber machine gun. On that range, you couldn't hear yourself think. But that gun's so important to an infantry company's total firepower that every one of us got 8 hours of instruction on it, both as gunner and assistant gunner. Along the way, we kept in touch with our firepower. For example, the 3.5-inch rocket launcher, another of the weapons available to the foot soldier. The instructors showed us what they could do with a high explosive round. Then it was our turn to take the firing line and try it for ourselves using practice rounds. We already had several hours of classroom instruction in the rocket launcher, so it wasn't entirely new to us. It's a two-man weapon, and we learned to function in both crew positions, as assistant gunner and as gunner. Again, safety was emphasized and re-emphasized. They showed us what could happen to anybody careless enough to stand in the way of the backblast. They didn't have to do it twice. Just the same, the instructors on this range, on every range, were constantly watching, checking, making sure that we not only handled our weapons effectively, but safely. Fort Ord isn't only a basic training center, it's also one of the largest centers in the world for advanced individual training in different Army specialties. One of these specialties is infantry, and the sign by the post entrance tells you so. There's the long rifle, the combat infantry badge worn by Army foot soldiers who've been in combat. We got used to seeing that badge because the men who give this advanced individual training are almost all combat veterans.
Welcome to Range 36, Weapons Demonstration. This morning you will see a demonstration of all the weapons of the infantry, weapons which you yourselves will learn to use during your next 8 weeks of advanced individual training.
That weapons demonstration was a surefire way to get our undivided attention right from the start of our training. It's quite an arsenal when you stop and think about it. The Major introduced us to the various weapons individually. Some we'd used, some we hadn't. They ranged from the light weapons carried by an infantry squad to the big recoilless rifle that rides a mount on a jeep and needs a 4-man crew to serve it. It really packs a punch. During the 6th week, we had another realistic training exercise. This began when we were marched into a stockade to learn about survival, escape, and evasion. The survival part of the instruction was especially interesting. You'd be amazed how many ways there are to get drinking water from plants. Then the instructor showed us something we could really get our teeth into, if we ever got hungry enough. He had a long display table, a sort of swampland smorgasbord all laid out, and he made the point there was no need to starve in the woods, since everything on the table could be eaten. Snakes, lizards, roots, all sorts of goodies. I can't say they looked too tempting at the time, but many a man has saved his life by knowing what to look for when survival depended on what he could find. We paid close attention because someday our survival might be at stake. The practical realism of the training was carried on into the final 2 weeks. In anti-tank warfare, for example, we got individual instruction in the recipe for Molotov cocktails and how to prepare them. We also learned how to serve them, piping hot and on the run. Our overall mission had been accomplished, and by and large, we felt pretty good about it. The officer in charge pointed out some of the mistakes we had made, but he said we'd done pretty well for the first time around. And he ought to know. He'd just recently come back from combat. As for me, I felt good, but I was glad to sit down. I was tired. It had been a long day, a long 8 weeks, and now it was over. We'd learned a lot. We had also learned to act as individuals, though, and that's important too, because in a few more days, we'll all have our orders, individual orders. So as I said earlier, Dad, I feel ready for whatever assignment comes. I've had the best training there is. So has Jim Stinson and Metzig. And so has every other guy in the platoon and in the company. And in every company that graduates from AIT Infantry.
Most of the training in AIT is designed to prepare the foot soldier for the challenges he will face on assignment to an active combat unit in Vietnam. But many AIT graduates are in fact assigned to other areas, such as Germany, where their constantly maintained readiness bolsters the defensive strength of NATO. Still others are assigned to Korea, where they help to keep watch over the uneasy truce signed more than a decade ago. For the global defense of freedom, the United States Army depends upon many factors, lightning-like firepower and mobility, a flexible and unbreakable chain of supply and resupply, and above all, the Army depends upon men trained to perform their assigned missions. In combat, no mission is greater than that of the infantry, and no man is more vital than the individual infantry soldier. This is the story of how infantrymen are trained, individually trained to perform their mission.